Okay, I'm going to call this session to order. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to this session. When we started thinking about how to partner with Conservation Nebraska, I said I need at least one session where we're highlighting what we're doing at Creighton, and in particular what we're doing with students. And so that's the session you came to. If you don't want to hear from students, but no, I think students tell great stories. So if you didn't see me earlier today, my name is Andrew Baruth. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability Programs here at Creighton University. And I am not responsible for much of what you're going to see today, but I am happy to support it and be excited about it. And so you're going to hear from 3 students today about our Nebraska Native Pollinator Garden. That was the outcome of a Student Sustainability Action Fund that we funded out of our department or office last year. And so we created this pollinator space here on campus. And it's just been a wonderful place to kind of get to know and get to explore, which our students are going to celebrate today. So with that, I'm going to introduce Anya Ortiz and Maria Sheshter, who worked with Dr. Ted Burke. Maybe some of you know Dr. Burke. He's prolific in the community as a kind of a citizen scientist and good person to think about in terms of engaging with pollinators, engaging with these fun little creatures and things. And so he hired these 2 students to kind of think about what could we learn by putting a pollinator garden on this space. So we're going to learn about the pollinators first, and then we're going to switch over and learn about the pollinator garden itself second. But with that, I'm going to introduce these 2 to present their work.
Hey guys. I'm Anya Ortiz.
I'm Maria Sheshter.
And we basically did some research studying the effectiveness of our pollinator garden in bringing in butterflies, bees, flies, wasps, all types of insects. So the title of our project is Insect Flower Visitors to a Native Plant Pollinator Garden and an Ornamental Flower Bed on a University Campus. We basically just compared our native plant pollinator gardens to many of our ornamental flower beds on campus.
So that was our main study in the project. We focused on the interactions between the flower visitors and the plants on 2 campus environments, which were the native pollinator garden and then the ornamental flower bed. And by focusing on the native plants and comparing that to the ornamental flower beds, we could really see what type of insects they were attracted to, and we mainly wanted to focus also on the conservation efforts and what this could mean for campus on Creighton here. Next.
So to get a little bit of an idea of what we were doing on campus, our native pollinator garden got put in this summer. The dimensions of each, there's 3 boxes on the 2nd level of the library. If you want to go visit it, it's beautiful in the summer, not currently. They look like this right now because it's the off season. But by summertime, hopefully some of our research will help aid in what flowers are going to go in here. So the dimensions, there's 3 boxes, and each box is about 12.75 meters by 1.83 meters. And there's plenty of beautiful flowers in it. The first bed and the last bed have just a regular native flower mix, and the second bed has very focused flowers. So we start off with our black-eyed Susan. This is found in our first and last garden. It's just a basic flower, very small. You'll find it all over the place if you walk around Nebraska. Then we have our butterfly weed, which is mostly found in our 2nd garden. Brings in beautiful monarchs, many beautiful butterflies come to those. Then we have some yellow nutsage. This was found in our first and last garden. Very, not the most effective plant, so you'll see later on. We would probably not want this in our gardens next year. Then we have the purple coneflower, beautiful flower and very effective for bringing in our bigger butterflies like monarchs, painted ladies, and swallowtails. They're also very good for bees. Bumblebees love them, honeybees love them. Feathery penistine, not our best flower out there, not very effective in bringing things in, but very native to Nebraska. Rattlesnake master. Now, if you want wasps, maybe you put in rattlesnake master. They're very effective for those guys, but they're also very effective in bringing things like bees in. And the bees actually really loved this in the beginning of August when we started this project. Next, we have garden tick seed, which was found in the 1st and 3rd. This is a part of the garden mix. So they're smaller flowers. Mostly honeybees will be visiting those. Then we call these foxtails. We put the scientific name to look cool. But these aren't very effective, but they are, once again, found all over Nebraska. Then we have our early goldenrod. This is actually a late bloomer and is fantastic for bringing in honeybees and, of course, wasps. They work together. Very in the late season. So your purple coneflower would be great to plant with early goldenrod because purple coneflower brings them in early August, while early goldenrod keeps them there till October. And then finally, we have some spotted bee balm. Once again, this was in our 1st and 3rd garden. They're very fantastic for bringing in smaller bees and like honeybees and sweat bees.
Our next focus is the ornamental flower bed. So this ornamental flower bed was in front of the Creighton Library, the Reinhardt Library. And then the dimensions for this was 12.20 meters, which in perspective, when you compare it to the 3 boxes, it's around just 1 box. But then if you put a little mental note about the dimensions, we're going to be comparing the results at the end to show how significant the native pollinator garden was in comparison to the ornamental flower beds. And then in the ornamental flower beds, the flowers that they had were the marigolds. So the marigolds mainly attracted skippers and honeybees. So the skippers loved them. You would mainly find them there hanging out. Next up is the canna. The canna was just there for looks. People even call them like plastic flowers. They don't really attract anything. Next up is the wax begonias. Same thing as the canna. They don't really attract any pollinators or insects, really, just there for looks. Lastly, sages. The bumblebees love the sages. 9 times out of 10, they would hang out there, as well as the skippers. The skippers love the sages. And then you can see here, that's how they kind of layered them. So it'd be the sages, the wax begonias, and then the cannas. And then the marigolds would be down there on the bottom.
So obviously we did some research on this. How did we actually conduct this research? So every day over an 8-week period from early August to late October, one person would walk around each pollinator area and count every single bee, butterfly, insect you saw, and then tally which flower they were on. So this was done at 2 different times. Maria would go at 11 a.m. on Tuesday, Thursdays, and Sundays, and I would go at 1 o'clock on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So basically, we did a little walk, just went from the top all the way down. If a butterfly appeared behind us while during our walk, we don't count it. Whatever's in front of you, you basically count as you walk. You just keep going until eventually you reach the end, and that's your count for the day. So you did that for our native boxes, and we also did it for outside of Reinhardt, which was very awkward. And if you might have saw us out there at 1 o'clock walking around. And basically, yeah, we just walked and counted and tallied. So our books were full of random notes.
And then this is the big comparison between the two of the total number of visitors and then the pollinator types. So the first focus is going to be the total number of visitors. So remember the mental note of the comparison with sizes. The pollinator native plant brought in 3,291 pollinators, and when the ornamental brought in 1,045. When there are 3 boxes, but mainly one of them was the main focus that had all the purple cone flowers, the early goldenrods. They mainly brought in all the insects and pollinators. When the ornamental, it was mainly like the bumblebees, which we're going to be focusing on later in the presentation. And then the pollinator types, the 3 of the boxes brought in 33 different types of insects and species, when the ornamental only brought in 19. So you can already tell the big difference the 2 had when comparison with the pollinators.
Now you might be thinking that just because there's 3 native boxes, it's probably the size that mattered. there's more space, more area for these native pollinators to go comparably to the outside. But truly the only box that was bringing in a lot of these bees and butterflies was that second box. So it's basically a one-to-one comparison when you're looking at it in your data at the end. Results. So we had a lot of visitors. We had 33 in total. So we had to make it a little bit easier to understand in a pie chart. So we highlighted some of our big ones. So our bumblebee population, which was the biggest out of both of the native pollinator garden and the ornamental garden. In our native pollinator garden, we had 2,220 bumblebees in an 8-week period. That is a lot of bumblebees to count. So you can just tell right off the bat that this native pollinator garden was fantastic in bringing in basic pollinators. We also had a huge monarch population in the native pollinator garden, which is beautiful to see because the monarchs are actually on the down low right now. They are dying off because of droughts and things like that. So having a pollinator garden be able to provide a safe space for these butterflies to come in, rest, eat, nourish themselves, and then get on top their track back to Mexico during their migration is a great thing to have, and it will probably aid in the monarch population going up. Hopefully. Our other category are things like sweat bees, honeybees, and we had giant resin bees and wasps. We all just categorized them together because it wasn't that important to see the difference between all of those. They did bring in a good amount, but it wasn't a huge deal. And then our butterflies, we had things like painted ladies and swallowtails, giant American snout nose, dainty sulfurs, orange sulfur, yellow sulfurs. There's plenty of butterflies that we got to see, so we just categorized them all together here. Yeah.
As for the results in the ornamental flower bed, you can see the big difference that of species that did visit. So our biggest one was bumblebees with 662, which in comparison to 2020, that's a lot. That's a big difference. And then with the monarchs, same. They mainly were, if we were to see them, they would mainly probably have been coming from upstairs, just visiting the ornamental beds. But we only had 3 of them. As for the butterflies, we had 293, which is a very big difference with the 700 that we found, as long as with the others. But just in comparison, you can see, specifically with the bumblebees and the monarchs.
Actually, for our butterflies down here, the skippers, which is an outlier in our research, the skippers actually loved the ornamental garden a lot more than they loved the native pollinator garden, most likely due to the marigolds. Skippers love marigolds. If you see these tiny guys, they'll definitely be on those cute little flowers. So that was actually one of the only butterflies or any species that actually visited the ornamental garden more than our native pollinator garden. So marigolds might be something we want to implement still on campus to bring in those skippers. Results and flower effectiveness. So our biggest flower upstairs was, we had 2 big hitters, which was the purple coneflower and the early goldenrod. This is just bringing in total insects, anything. Our purple coneflower bring in 755 insects, while our early goldenrod brought in 731. You see, as mentioned before, these guys are seasonal, so our purple coneflower brought in a lot of bees, butterflies early season in August, and our early goldenrod brought in a lot of insects late season. So there are 2 great animals, 2 great plants to plant together in a garden so that you hit all the seasons and make sure that these pollinators can stay as long as they can. And then in our sages and marigolds down in our ornamental flowers, as mentioned before, canna lilies and begonias, not very important to mention. I think in total they brought in only 3 bees, butterflies, anything. And that's most likely because a butterfly was probably resting on them while they wanted to go to the sages or wanted to go to the marigolds. So we mostly just focused on sages and marigolds. Now the sages brought in 472 insects in total, and the marigolds brought in 137. So you can just see back to back, our native pollinator garden did a fantastic job, and to be honest, a way better job than our ornamental flowers in bringing in these beautiful insects.
So insects, these are just some pictures of the insects that did visit our native garden and also the ornamental garden. So you have the hawk moth, these are the skippers that we were talking about. They love the purple coneflowers as well as the marigolds. You can see one over there just resting on a marigold. And then you have the wasps. And then the soldier beetles, which were very popular towards the end of the season. They loved the golden honey, the early goldenrods. And then some more of the wasps, same with the bumblebees. And then this was the swallowtail. And some of the hoverflies, the painted ladies also love the purple coneflowers and the monarch. So the majority of the insects really, really love the purple coneflowers, as well as the rattlesnake master and the sages. They were really, really popular. Mm-hmm. But this is just a summary of all the insects that did visit the gardens.
Yeah, so once again, if you want flies, wasps, and a lot of other creepy crawlies, I would go for rattlesnake master. As you can see here, we have a beautiful blowfly right there, and then a spider hawk. Aren't these guys terrifying? We actually didn't get stung once while we were out there, and I promise you guys we were really close. So these wasps, wow, they look very scary. Pose really no danger to anyone as long as you don't hit their tree or like attack them. They just relax in their areas, and we were very close to them. We got up and close, interacted. We needed to tell which species they were, and they never bothered us once. So that's just a lovely thing to note. As if we were to put in more of these pollinators, more of these pollinator plants, it wouldn't be a danger to our Creighton community. It would just be another space for these beautiful insects to have, while our students would get to interact and see these beautiful insects. Yeah. I think that is it.
Thank you for listening. Yeah. And we just wanted to say a special thank you to Lily Sullivan and Ben Kinker for creating this native Nebraska pollinator garden. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk and spread our research.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Let's thank Anya and Maria. So in typical Creighton student fashion, they are busy humans, so I will allow maybe a couple questions, then they have to skedaddle for 3 o'clock. So,
did you see many honeybees? Usually my experience with urban gardens are a lot of honeybees. Maybe there's no hives nearby campus, but...
There was actually a huge population of honeybees. They mostly came late season on that early goldenrod, so hopefully we can plant a lot more of that in. They weren't really attractive during the August season. Maybe it's due to the flowers that we had out there, but the early goldenrod really brought them in. Yes.
I know that the ornamental gardens, people kind of think they're an eyesore in the off season. Is there anything you would like to see like implemented so that I don't know, the students really like to see flowers and different things that are good for the community?
These flowers, a lot of our flowers that we did research on, they do die off during the cold months, as most flowers do. So sadly, the early goldenrod actually is planted down by McGloin, and those lasted very long. And the ones up in our garden lasted very long. So I think that'd be a great thing for people on campus to see. I mean, they're beautifully bright yellow, and they bring in a lot of things. So it's just something that we can have.
And it's also, we don't really want them to completely cut off the ornamental flowers, mainly just add in like more, because the marigolds brought in a lot of visitors, so is like the sages. It's mainly like the canna and the begonias that like were kind of like plastic flowers. They're really pretty, but they don't really bring in any visitors.
Have you been able to talk to like Creighton groundskeeping and like the landscaping? Because there's a lot of money that goes into grounds work here, and is this university considering implementing, pollinators just in their grounds practice?
We would love to get in contact with the groundskeepers. I mean, we just finished all this stuff in October, and we've been digging through mountains of research. Obviously, we went for an 8-week period every single day, so there's just a lot of data out there. We are planning to write a paper and publish it, but hopefully this is our first step into maybe talking to grounds and getting more of these beautiful plants out there.
And our next speaker will speak to that just a little bit.
Wonderful.
Why did you select 11 and 1 to go and do your observations?
It's a great question.
I feel like it's mainly during. That is a great question. Our main focus was just mainly during the most time where like the UV would probably be high, or like during. So it wasn't during the sunrise and like the sun was still coming out, so the sun was like the strongest then. So we just really picked 11 and 1. It's in our favor. It also worked really well with our schedules, and like we had usually previously like visited the plants, the flower boxes, but it's the ornamental, and we just saw during that time there would be like the most activity, so we just stuck with those times.
And while digging through our data, hopefully we'll see if there is a big difference between the two times. I mean, we were out there at different times. Just from an overview of looking at it, I think 1 o'clock is the prime time if you want to see bees, butterflies, and things like that. And 11 might be just a little too early for them, or might be just a little bit too cold for them. We actually took data of the temperature every day and all of that, so hopefully we'll get all that out there.
All right, let's thank these students one more time. And let them skedaddle on. All right, so those students gave you kind of an insight of what we were able to kind of see within this pollinator space. Our next speaker is Caden Collins, who actually is one of our AmeriCorps members out of the Office of Sustainability Programs. And he's going to share with us a little bit about Creighton as kind of a microcosm of the changing urban landscape, which I think will be kind of interesting. He'll highlight the pollinator garden, but also some other features on campus as well. So with that, Caden Collins.
Yeah, so my name's Caden Collins. I'm not only a sophomore here at Creighton University studying environmental science and economics, but as Andrew pointed out, I am also an AmeriCorps member serving the Common Ground program through my site here at Creighton University in the Office of Sustainability Programs. And what we really just saw from Anya Maria here is that these native pollinator plants do a really great job of pulling in our pollinators and really creating a good habitat for these bugs. And so Creighton throughout the years has been changing its approach in a slight way to try and create more of a habitat for different bugs and insects and pollinators that really reflects how Omaha has handled its growth as an urban center. So, wrong button. There we go. So we can start off looking at Creighton's environmental history. Creighton's been around for over 140 years now, and what started as one building has now grown into being about a 1 kilometer stretch east to west, and we're at about half a kilometer north to south. So we've really grown from this one main building that's right here, Creighton Hall, that you'll still see up at the top of the hill on campus here. And some of the big changes that happened environmentally during these times have had to do a lot with how streets were being designed in Omaha. In the 1920s, there was a streetcar that ran the length of this area with walking paths next to it. And so there wasn't a whole ton of trees along these paths at that time. It was a very open area, and we were looking at Creighton providing some of these spaces like the Jesuit gardens and having some of the trees in their own kind of personal spaces. But that changed a lot more in the 1950s when Omaha paved over the streetcar and created a regular road. And a lot of the change there became trees that were normal street trees, urban street trees at the time. And so we're going into the 60s in Creighton having probably a couple dozen of trees with a handful of species. And that is what Creighton really looks like until the late 1970s when Creighton pulls up the road and makes it into the walking mall that we have outside today. And that change really ignites this ability to create a greater landscape variety. So So we're looking at, in the 1920s, we have these horse chestnuts that are being planted behind Creighton Hall. We know this is about the early 1920s because they can actually be seen in photographs from the 1923 graduation. To the 1970s, creating that walking mall, we get all of these honey locusts that go up and down the mall. We are working on surveying all of the trees at this time, and we're about halfway done, and there's over 40 of these that we've counted so far on campus. So they are all over the place. But today, we're looking at a lot more arboretum species and creating this large variety of species around campus. So we're adding things like London plane tree, which you'll see right outside the Harper Center here on the walking mall. And for much of Creighton's history, these trees were what defined ecology on Creighton's campus. They didn't have a whole lot of shrubs and plants. They're mainly in planters boxes. But we've seen recently a large shift into that, especially with the Creighton Student Sustainability Action Fund and the creation of this pollinator garden. So Ben Kincourt and Lily Sullivan proposed to the Creighton Student Sustainability Action Fund a donor fund that allows students to submit proposals on sustainable actions here at Creighton to really take over what was a somewhat dilapidated space on the second level of the Reiner Alumni Memorial Library. It's a very accessible space. There's a door straight from the second level. There's stairs on the outside to get up to it. But no one was really going up there because it was mainly weeds. It was overgrown. There wasn't anywhere to sit. It wasn't a very enjoyable spot. I'd actually go up there last year if I needed a really quiet study space because I knew no one would ever be up there. But that changed in this past spring when Ben Kincourt and Lily Sullivan worked with the Office of Sustainability on creating this pollinator garden. And since then, we've had a lot of success. We've been able to host pollinator picnics and weeding parties that have really brought out quite a lot of people, as you can see over to the right-hand side here. These are people that may never have noticed that the stairs that were outside the library actually led up to anywhere at all. And the thing that I want to really stress with this space is that this wasn't really a special order. These were all plants that were picked up from Omaha nurseries that are commercially available that you could get yourself. And I think it really shows that Omaha is ready for these native plants. But how does the pollinator garden thrive? Well, we try to have a large variety of different species in these 3 beds. But there are some that are more primary than others that Anya Maria did touch on. Looking at a lot of black-eyed Susan and purple coneflower, they help to provide a lot of healthy habitat space and food sources for our pollinators, especially for things like the purple coneflower here in the middle that has really thick stems that provide a great nesting habitat for some of these burrowing insects and bees during their hibernation cycles. But as well, we try to include some other varieties of plants, like we have common milkweed in our beds, as well as blue grama grasses and the rattlesnake master, try to round out the profile for food sources and habitat for these pollinators. So these are the ecological benefits of the native plants, and that may be enough for you to think about implementing your own native planting. But there's a lot of other benefits that these native plants can have, and that can really be seen with the 2020 planting of native plants along 24th Street at Creighton University. These plants are really beneficial to the fact that Creighton is situated at the top of a hill, because native plants have a really great ability to be drought resistant, which allows them to look nice in the middle of summer when we have these sometimes really prolonged series of droughts, but it also allows for these plants to need very little maintenance. Part of the idea of the pollinator garden was that we didn't want to burden facilities with another space that they had to constantly be watering, constantly be weeding, because they do a really great job on the rest of campus, and having more and more spaces that they're having to devote their time to just really wasn't beneficial to either project. But as well, these pollinator plants tend to have really deep roots, which also allows them to be great for water retention and erosion resistance, which is really great for Creighton since we're on a hill. It allows for a bit less flooding and a bit less mud-soaked boots when we do get our rain. And I know that Nebraska isn't exactly known for its mountains, but like Creighton, there's a lot of different possibilities of places built on slopes that could really benefit from these native plants being able to slow down that water, being able to keep that soil in its place. So how can we emulate it? Well, campuses have somewhat of an advantage. Both academic and corporate campuses tend to have a lot of impervious surfaces, so a lot of roofs, parking lots, places where water can't get anywhere. And there's not a whole lot of green space that they have to work with. So native plants allow for this ability to be the most efficient source of drainage and of really being able to keep things like water and their soils consistent. Because who wants to build a corporate campus that's going to get washed away in 30 years because the ground underneath it is going into the river? But you don't have the same type of space as corporate campuses do. The pollinator garden is pretty small. It's about 300 square feet in total, but that may still be a lot of space for your home. That's why I'm recommending the size of a pool table. So a pool table is large enough to get this wide variety of species, native plants, into your home, but it doesn't take away from the ornamental plants that you may want to plant. It doesn't take away from your lawn if that's something that you're interested in. But it is enough to start to provide this habitat for pollinators. And as well, if every home in the Omaha metro were to plant a pollinator garden the size of a pool table, we're looking at expanding the pollinator habitat around Omaha by about 25%. So there's a big change that can happen here just by this small space. But what Creighton has done isn't the full exhaustive list of varieties. There's a whole spectrum of native plants in just about every color imaginable that may suit your fancy. And there's a lot more resources that you can go on to look this up. The Nebraska Extension offices are a really good space to start. They have some really exhaustive lists. They can get you their horticulture monthly newsletter and really provide you this starting point for looking at your options on native plants. But as well, a much more exhaustive list is also a series that Conservation Nebraska has done in the past, and you can look up on YouTube by searching up Conservation Nebraska. These two videos themselves were done by Bob Hendrickson of the How's It Growin' radio show, and are much more exhaustive on your choices, not only of these flowers and grasses that Creighton has really taken a liking to, but also of native trees and shrubs. So how this has really happened throughout Omaha's history is we've gone into a place that has a lot of great native trees and native plants, and we've built over the top of it. And then we've decided to be very unintentional with what we've been planting. We've gone for looks rather than what was here before. And today, we could be a bit more like Creighton, who planted 130 new trees in 15 new species in this past year. And we can become intentional with our choice to restore a small slice of Omaha that we've built over. Are there any questions?
Questions for Caden?
Yes.
Is the university considering having like edible landscaping
So that is something that has been introduced. So a lot more of the trees that are being planted now are things like hackberries and crab apples that could be that are a much more edible landscape than what we saw even 20 years ago. Yes.
Isn't London plane tree a monster?
So it can be. There are with the other trees that are currently surrounding it on campus. It's keeping it very much at bay. The point of kind of highlighting it in this talk is to more look at how Creighton has transitioned into trying to create this large variety of trees and plants on its campus. Yes.
Speaking of variety, how many different types do you recommend if it's a pool table size? Because if it's black-eyed Houston and coneflower that are bringing in the most, should I plant all of those or do a bunch of different ones?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important parts with it is if you're looking for variety, there can still be these one or two major players in your space. And so while some of like the beds for that Creighton planted have 10 different species in them, and some of the more prairie-esque beds, they still generally had like one or two major players in them. So if you're looking to provide 5 or 6 different types of flowers in your bed, still being able to have kind of this plurality of these 1 or 2 species that really help, just so you can provide different types of habitats to all these pollinators, because even the 1 or 2 that are bringing in a whole lot aren't necessarily bringing in them all. Yes.
Were any of those people disappointed when they showed up for the weeding party? No. So I was just going to comment. I was a landscape designer for 20 years. You guys did a great job on the layout. Really looked nice. How'd you select those specific plants?
I was not a part of the team on that, but.
So we really work with Mulholz on that, who is works at Creighton quite a bit, and they gave Ben and Lily a lot of ideas on that. But then the layout was really Ben and Lily.
They will tell you first that this was not in their wheelhouse, but they learned a lot in that process.
Yes.
How many of the new trees are you planting? Only native trees now?
No, so Creighton is looking at trying to produce a variety, and really because there isn't a space for a true like arboretum like UNL has, trying to make the campus more like an arboretum. So there has been more native trees being planted over these past couple of years compared to looking back at like the 50s and the 70s, but they're really going for a variety to showcase these arboretum species and create this arboretum atmosphere on campus. Yes.
Are they labeled throughout campus?
So that is.
We need to use our app.
Yeah. So that is something there was an effort about 10 years ago for some trees to get labeled, and they unfortunately are not getting labeled currently as much as we may like them to. Yes.
I was curious if you let your native plants stand all winter so that they could have possible feed for birds.
Yes, yeah, we haven't touched the pollinator garden since we weeded it in September this past year. So yeah, it's gone the entire winter, just providing.
With them standing up.
Yes, with them standing. Yeah, we didn't cut anything at all. Yes.
When you did the weeding, what criteria did you use to determine what were used?
So we had discussed with Dr. Ted Burke on what species were becoming these major pests and weeds in these places. Some of them were invasive weeds that had sprung up, but we did, I know for part of it, try to lessen the load of some of the foxtail that was in there because it was really starting to overcrowd these other species that we were trying to keep alive in the bed.
I will say it's an anxiety we have. We're planning a pollinator experience on Earth Day, let's call it that, where we want students and faculty and staff to engage with the pollinator garden, but we discussed, will we let them weed it a bit? And we kind of came to the conclusion, no, probably not.
In the back.
Kind of a follow-up to about letting the plants stand. Because I guess I need some advice from anyone about, right, I know it's not only feed for the birds if you leave them your plants, but also it's my understanding that the beneficial insects have a place to stay in the winter. So right now,
yes,
it's still too early to cut, I think, okay.
Yeah.
But there are some that haven't really done anything for them anyway. Is that true, or should I just assume anything that's out there in the garden could be a home for insects?
You can knock on the stem and just see if you get
Are you there?
I don't.
I'll come here.
There's a lot of resources out there for people interested in native plants. The Iowa Native Plant Society and Nebraska Native Plant Society. You want to talk about your upcoming
Yes.
Because at 10 after, I was planning to transition to an open conversation.
Okay.
So if there was a last minute question for Caden, I will let you ask it, and then we'll transition to more of a broad conversation.
Okay.
Yes.
Are there any locations on campus where the groundskeepers use like herbicides or pesticides, and how does that affect, like, were you able to take that in, I know that wasn't your project, but did you take that into account in that experiment? Because I know right below the pollinator garden there's a huge lawn area, and I'm not sure if there's a lot of Roundup being used there or anything like that.
I will give that to Andrew.
So we have more pollinator space, or I should say native spaces popping up all over campus. And so this is all just getting worked into our master plan of how landscape looks at our campus. It's not perfect. And so this is, your question is exactly how we're gonna have to tackle that, is what spaces we have to be mindful of what pesticides and herbicides we're using, and which places are we allowed to kind of let it grow more natively. And like I said, that's just something that we're only just starting to figure out well for this campus with our current kind of who we've hired to do the work and those types of things. So how do we build those contracts so that, because it's a lot of manual labor to do weeding without herbicides, and so we're always navigating that, but we know we have to because we're just growing spaces that are more native. One more for Kate.
Yeah, is the hope that these practices then are integrated into, say, your education?
Yeah, so I know, particularly with Dr. Ted Burke's classes, they have gone up to the pollinator garden and try to learn through that space. As we are expanding more spaces with these native plants, there is a more concerted effort to try to integrate that into lesson plans where it makes sense.
Yeah, at this point, the School of Medicine has a whole class on restorative recreation, where they're utilizing these native spaces to have classes, talk about pollinators, talk about restorative recreation. And we're seeing, more courses think about how to use campus as a lab, and this is one of those spaces that we wanted to promote as being a learning lab space. Good question. All right, so let's thank Caden again. But I was also thinking, how often you get a bunch of like-minded people in the same room. So I wanted to give us kind of 15 minutes until the hors d'oeuvres start. Maybe 10 if you want a head start. But to maybe address some of these questions, because we do have a lot of experts in the room, which is awesome. There was an open question that I kind of skirted around. now I forget what it was. Oh, you were going to talk to us about something. So.
Okay, yeah, so I'm not an expert, but I am with Nebraska Monarchs, and we're doing a native plant giveaway. And we decided this year to do it as pre-designed gardens. So if any of you guys are interested in a pollinator garden that's pre-designed, so each garden is going to have milkweed, which is the host plant for monarchs, and then it's going to have a bloomer for each season, as well as a grass or a sedge. 16 plants in a 6x10 area. But yeah, if you guys are interested, it's on May 18th at Omaha South, and it's a first come first served public giveaway. So they'll get a garden designed to go specifically with their plants. So you can come and just take the plants. The plants will be starter plants, not seeds, and just take it and plant it in your yard. So.
The location again?
Omaha South High School.
And what day?
It's May 18th from 1 to 4, and we're also going to have an environmental expo. So if any of you guys are in here representing an organization that would like to have a table, please let me know. We have like Milkweed Matters is coming, and Grasslands Unlimited, and some other great organizations that'll be there to answer questions. But we're really trying to get the public engaged in creating their own pollinator gardens.
Please.
I'm part of a committee working on for the Audubon Society of planting native plants, and I think it's important that we bring back the pollinators, but we also have to remember that the losses of our native birds have been extremely lost. I think we have like 25% of the birds that we had from 45 years ago, but the pesticides are neurologics that actually are absorbed in the plants that they use. The fertilizers are not organic. And you don't need much fertilizer for your native plants, but there are also other plants I wish we could bring into, like they're gonna plant some berry bushes for winter feed for the birds. Some of the blue stem grasses that also attract bugs to stay there. And a lot of, I've seen the cocoons actually made on blue stem, and also praying mantis. I've seen them make their nest cups, but I think it's important that we do make it a balance of nature so that all things can gain from it.
I'm just going to give you some resources for native plants. One of the people they forget about is in Clarkson, Nebraska, Bluebird Nursery. It's a little bit of a drive, but they have a great website with tons of native plants. There's Kate Codis's Nebraska Legacy, and she's south of Lincoln. And then what's the gentleman in Lincoln?
Nathan Duffy at Midwest Natives.
Midwest Natives in Lincoln.
That's where we get our plants.
But they sell out quickly.
Yeah.
Now seeds, you can collect seeds yourself from. Like Audubon Society, we have 2 prairies you can collect seeds from there. It's a little trickier to get things grown from seeds. The one place to never buy seeds, never go to Target or Walmart and buy prairie in a can. It's crap. or Home Depot or whatever. Don't buy, those aren't native plants there. So, but you got to do your research. I said again, it's Nebraska Native Plant Society. We got a free website you can be on Facebook, and Iowa Native Plant Society. There's a great seminar coming up called the Lust Hill Prairie Seminar, which is totally free, and it's in Ottawa, Iowa. It's June 30 and 31st, May 30 and 31st and June 1st. We have 40 different speakers. They're going to be talking about prairie plants like crazy. That's free.
How much where is that?
Lust Hill, Ottawa, Iowa. Lust Hill Prairie Seminar. Look it up. And anyway, so there's tons of information out there. I was looking at some of the plants you guys have, and one of them is just driving me nuts. You got Echinacea purpureosa, which is not native to this area. You should add angustifolia or punctata. And not trying to be smart here, but be careful what you plant. Some of these natives can get aggressive. So anyway, but there's tons of free information out there. Go to her seminar. There's Nebraska Monarchs, and then there's anyway. There's a lot of fun things with these over the years, but be careful and be ready to be frustrated sometimes.
Thank you for that.
All right, I'll shut up.
Another resource out there is the Nebraska Arboretum, and
Yeah.
they have their big plant sale coming up. It's April, I think it's the 27th, that Saturday. I know it conflicts with some
Spring
birthday
Affair.
things. Yeah, down in Lincoln.
Yeah, that's great.
But it's like the Black Friday of plant sales. Like, you need to plan out what you want to get when you get.
And they get there some Bluebird Nursery where they
Yes,
get
yes,
yeah.
yep.
It's a great.
Do they have one? They have one in Omaha sometimes, right?
Mhm.
They, like,
yeah.
I don't know where that was.
Yeah, the Arboretum has the plant sales throughout the summer. Just look on their website.
Fontanelle Forest sometimes will plant some. We sell native plants too.
All right, the last thing that I wanted to just highlight, so I do sit on the city's climate action and resilience plan, and that's the focus of today. And so for those of you who haven't engaged with this yet, there was an exhaustive study done in Omaha. It was published in October of last year in preparation for our climate action and resilience plan, specifically on ground cover, heat island effects, and carbon sequestration. So if you're curious about how your neighborhood's doing, this is one way to check that out and figure out how are you doing in terms of this is grass coverage, this is tree coverage. I would go through it, but it's 52 pages. I'll show you just kind of a typical map. So you'll see different maps for what is the tree canopy coverage, what is the lawn and grass covering, where are some like potential opportunities to be looking for to actually see growth in this space as we're planning that resilience plan. This is the metric we're using to kind of identify what are some key areas we want to kind of address. Something that Caden alluded to was, what impenetrable spaces do we have and how can we adjust those to have better water retention spaces. So those of you who aren't familiar with this, so Pale Blue Dot, Ted Redmond will be giving the panel here in an hour and a half. But he is the president of Pale Blue Dot, and it's their company that's helping us with our climate action resilience planning, in particular this data analytics. I don't know if he'll talk about plants, so I just wanted to bring it up today. He has a lot of things that he could talk about today. But anyway, there's a whole website devoted to the Omaha Climate Action Plan. People know it? I don't know, I can pull it up. But anyway, there's a study on this, but there's also studies on energy and buildings and a variety of other things as well. But if you're curious about how we're standing in Omaha, this is a great resource to see how that goes. All right, anything for the good of the group, or I'll close this session.
I'm just going to throw out food forest and permaculture. If you don't know what that is, just check it out, and that's it.
So the website is palebluedot.llc, and then just search for Omaha in there. But you'll probably remember Pale Blue Dot, maybe not the LLC. All right, thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you upstairs.